think for most locals that go there, it's not really a tourist destination. It's all the locals, and it's just one of their favorite burger spots because it does a good burger. So I think they kind of forget the fact that it's a toilet burger.
So far in our first season of Sidewalk Ballet, we've talked about building community in third places and local investment, making art. We've talked about engaging people who use spaces and the creation and stewardship of those spaces. Talked about equity, ownership, trauma, and joy, the future and past of cities. Today, we're talking about bathrooms. Might seem odd at first, or funny, or maybe just uncomfortable. Bathrooms aren't something we usually talk about when we talk about cities, at least not directly. They're personal, bodily, a little awkward, easy to joke about, and easy to ignore. But public bathrooms are deeply connected with how cities work and who they work for. They can tell a story of a place's history and reveal windows to a city's prosperity and assumptions about class, gender, who's expected to linger in public space and who isn't. Once you start thinking about this, it can take you to some strange and very interesting places. It's what took Claire to eating a burger that was prepared in a converted toilet.
I was just reading the free newspaper you get on the tube, and there was an advert for the London Loo tour, and I just thought, that's really random. What is this? I have to give it a go. So I went along, and they kind of talk about the history of London and England's toilet system, throw in some fun facts. You get to visit a couple of places. And that's how I found out that there's converted toilets across London.
Claire is a travel writer who publishes the blog Curious Claire.
I mean, I think if anyone's got an interest in converted toilets, London is probably the best place. There's a cafe, a couple cocktail bars. We've got outside of London in Oxford, they even have a hotel that's a converted public toilet. That's on my list to visit the next time I go to Oxford. You know, who would buy a toilet to open a cafe? Until someone did, and now everyone does. At the end, you go to the cellar door, which is a converted sort of cocktail bar. I just never thought about toilets in that way before. It's just somewhere you go when you need to go. And then suddenly, because at the cellar door, not only do they, have the quirkiness that they are a converted toilet, they had cool toilets in the bar that were see-through until the moment you locked it. And as soon as you locked it, they frosted up so no one could see. And it just opened up a whole world of weird toilets and converted toilets that I became a little bit fascinated with.
Nobody likes a long line at the loo, but Claire's curiosity about toilets put her and a new friend in a very long line, not because they needed a bathroom.
So the Burgermeister burger place realized there were quite a few in London and went, I wonder if there's more around the world, and just kind of typed it into Google, stumbled across it, and then the next time I went to Berlin, went to visit it. So I actually dragged some guy I didn't know to it. I was actually in Hamburg at the time, and a friend was doing the marathon in Berlin and invited me over. And he had no interest in the burger place, whereas this other guy was like, yeah, I'll come. So it's just almost like street food. You just go up to it, get your burger and take it away. But they've kept signs. So you've still got the women's and men's signs either side of it, obviously in German. And so you can see it's an old toilet, but you don't actually go inside that one. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's just like this little street food type thing. It won't take long, but it's so popular. The queue was about an hour. I think we were waiting for this burger. And the guy I dragged along was starving, so he didn't like me until we got the burger. But once we had the burger, it was so good, he completely forgot about the wait.
It's not just converted bathrooms that draw curiosity and celebration.
I think probably the best known quirky toilets in London, there's a bar called Sketch, and they have these egg-shaped toilet pods. They're probably the most photographed toilets in London.
In Tokyo, people now book walking tours to see public bathrooms designed by some of the world's most famous architects. These bathrooms aren't hidden or apologized for. They're treated as signals that someone thought about who would use them, how they'd feel, and what it means to be cared for in public space. But celebrated public bathrooms aren't reserved only for large metropolises. In Lucas, Kansas, a town with a population of 332, according to the 2020 U.S. Census, There's a public restroom that is a full-blown work of mosaic art. And of course, the restroom itself is in the shape of a toilet, complete with a giant unrolled toilet paper sidewalk leading to the entrance, something the town is openly proud of. In Kawakawa, New Zealand, a public bathroom designed by artist Friedenreich Hundertwasser has become the town's main tourist attraction, with visitors coming not just to use it, but to see it. These toilets are functional infrastructure and public art. They aren't afterthoughts, they're destinations. So on the one hand, we're clearly fascinated by toilets. We turn them into restaurants, we put them on tours, we make them works of art. And yet at the same time, for most of history, public bathrooms are one of the least talked about and thought about pieces of city infrastructure. Even though they quietly shape who feels comfortable staying in public space and for how long, that tension between fascination and avoidance is where this conversation starts. Lezlie Lowe is a journalist and the author of No Place to Go. She spent years thinking about public bathrooms, not as curiosities, but as a window into how cities actually function, who they're designed for, who gets left out, and what it means to treat something as basic as restroom as optional. So after marveling at some of the world's strangest and most beautiful toilets, I wanted to zoom out, to look at what public bathrooms reveal about our cities and the people moving through them every day. Here's my conversation with Lezlie Lowe. So thank you so much for jumping on and talking to us, talking some potty talk with us.
Always the puns.
Yeah. So I should start by just a blanket statement. Forgive the pun. So, because we'll have a lot of puns. We can't help it. Why is that? Why are there so many puns about bathrooms?
Well, actually, I think there's an answer that really ties into the idea of bathrooms, and it's that we don't have a lot of language for talking about bathrooms in our culture, in Western culture, and so we can only joke or be disgusted, and that just doesn't leave any, like, there's no daylight in there for us to have rational conversations about need and caring and all of the different elements you can look at. So I think that's why it is, but I'm fully supportive of the bathroom pun. I use a lot in my book.
Well, and it's interesting because I think it's an uncomfortable thing. People don't necessarily want to or have to talk about it. And so I think when things are uncomfortable, it's sometimes just making it a joke makes it a little easier to talk about the weird stuff. But I'm excited to talk to you about this. You've done a lot of research about public bathrooms. There's so much to it, from, gender and class and just all sorts of things. Maybe this is a bold statement, I think, but maybe there's no better marker or barometer of how a city is for its people and how it performs for people than the experience of a public bathroom. So how did you come to this? How did you get into this exploration?
So the way I got into public bathrooms, was I
should
just
make
had
it a
this
drinking
kind of
game every time there's a
I
pun.
know.
Just take a shot of something.
I won't say I had an epiphany because it wasn't a single moment, but I did have this realization once, not when I had one kid, but when I had two young kids. So I would have had, a baby and a toddler. I realized my entire relationship to the city had changed because we lived in downtown Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, very close to a big central park called the Halifax Common, which is, fields and baseball, and it's a great place to go with kids. There's a playground. We would walk downtown. And I couldn't navigate the city the same way I had before I had kids. And I feel like that was there was some manageability when I just had a baby. But then when I had a toddler, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. So I discovered that my bathroom needs had changed because I had this other human who's was in my care, and her needs were different than my own. So I sort of had to adopt that need, and that made me look at bathrooms differently. I have worked and work as a journalist, and at that time I was a features writer for the Alternative Weekly in Halifax, and I thought, okay, there's something here, I'm going to dig into it. I realized there was this tiny, tiny group of individuals who were looking at public bathrooms in municipal spaces and other spaces. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write about this. So I would say that that very first piece I did, which is a really long feature I wrote about accessibility, and it was about people experiencing homelessness, but it was mostly about gender and, how bathrooms aren't working. And it was really laser focused on my city, right? And one of the things I uncovered in my reporting is that, somebody from one of the softball teams on the weekend had the keys to the bathroom that was on the common, and they would just lock it on Sunday when they left. And nobody would open it. So it would be closed all week until they needed it on the weekend. And it just seemed like it was a bizarre, like uncontrolled, yet hyper important element. And nobody was really taking responsibility for it. So yeah, it was, I talked to architectural historians, I talked to designers, I talked to just people, I went out and did streeters and talked to people about bathrooms and what they were experiencing. And a lot of it was about gender issues, and it was about women.
So speaking to that, like the gender, the potty parity, which I think is, you called it, how do historical decisions about how cities were built impact today's public bathrooms?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at that. The research that I've done and my book covers Canada, the US, and the UK, pretty much, strictly speaking. So I'm speaking only from that kind of lens. When public sanitation started to become something that cities cared about, it was like late 19th century, and it would be in, major cities, not smaller cities. And the thrust at that time was, okay, people are flocking to cities, and by people, we mean men, and there are really no women here. And if there are women here, they probably shouldn't be here. So we're going to build bathrooms because we want to provide, there was this real Victorian push toward like care for hygiene and pushing hygiene, which is positive. But fundamentally, when cities put in bathrooms, they put in single sex bathrooms for men. And so that's one element that is kind of interesting and informs the way we think about bathrooms, because who knows if that had not been the norm, maybe we would have had a bathroom culture that developed where bathrooms were single stall and all gender. The other historical impact would be bathrooms typically started out as in the late 19th, not started out, because when did bathrooms even start? But these were subterranean spaces because people did not want bathrooms near their shops and their churches and their homes. And so subterranean bathrooms were built, which was, again, it's better than nothing, but it is actually quite problematic because not everybody can use stairs the same as other people. So that's presented a problem. You see these bathrooms extant in cities like London or Dundee, Scotland. And, some of these bathrooms still exist, but they're all being sold off, right? And they're turning into like kicky little cocktail bars and things because you can't have a space that's not accessible in today's day and age. So that's another sort of historical influence on the way bathrooms exist today or fail to exist today.
Right. One of the things that was kind of a revelation that I knew and understand, but never thought about it. In most places, there's no statutory mandate for cities to provide public bathrooms. For private spaces, there's a whole slew of statutory requirements for bathrooms, but in the general public sphere, cities aren't really required to. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Chip, it's so interesting because it's so incredibly challenging to make I tried hard to figure out what are the rules broadly, and it's just the jurisdictionality is so complex. There's no one rule, but I would say very broadly speaking, yes, there are not statutory requirements for cities to provide public bathrooms for citizens and visitors. And you're absolutely right. There are a raft of different kinds of code and layers of code, municipal, in Canada, provincial or state, federal, all kinds of code that determine design of bathroom, size of bathroom, number of bathrooms per person per floor. There's a lot of that. But the core kind of, you have to provide a public bathroom every 300 meters in a downtown core of, X size, as far as I can tell, is not a thing.
Yeah. And how many times, like anecdotally, I see so many businesses or properties who want to renovate, and the inhibiting factor is, well, once we renovate, the cost of getting the bathroom to code is prohibitive, so we're not gonna do anything.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that paradox of the private requirements required by the public government, as it were, and yet there's no public requirements for needing to provide that. I want to jump back to the gender thing, because you talked about the historic piece, and cities historically have been designed for, but also by, people with certain sets of requirements for bathrooms that are very different than everybody's. I think one of the things is, we look at almost comically the line at the women's room, and why is the women's room so much longer. I remember, I think it was an SNL sketch where they went into the women's bathroom, and it was a big like party scene there, like cracking the mystery, where I think Dan Aykroyd and Belushi went in drag into the women's room and found that it was this whole fantasy world, because what takes them so long in there, but what takes them so long in there is really math.
Yes, 100%.
So talk about that a little bit. Why is the line so long there?
Yeah, so I'll speak in generalities, because as I'm sure you can appreciate, there's not a lot of research on this, but there are a couple of studies that indicate biological women take about twice as long as biological men to use the bathroom, so urination. When you say that, it sounds like, what? But then when you dig into the reasons, it's completely understandable. So women have, bear with me here, more complex clothing often. Women use stalls. Women do not use urinals. So when you go into a stall, you close the door, you lock the door. I've said this, so many times, and people are like, oh, it's true. The lock never works. Like, you got to fiddle with the lock. It takes a couple seconds. You situate yourself. Then maybe there's toilet paper, or maybe there isn't. And then you're dealing with that. Women also take longer to empty their bladders than men. Also, there are more women going into the bathroom because biological women menstruate. Women use the bathroom more frequently. They actually urinate more frequently than men. And pregnancy causes women to go in. Women checking fertility causes women to go in. Women are more frequently caregivers for people who are older or who have cognitive issues that mean that they need care, or children. So there's all of these different reasons women are in the bathroom. And that makes us take longer, right? That tells you right there, just women need more bathrooms. But what we see in a lot of buildings, particularly 20th century buildings, is when the buildings were designed, it's binary bathrooms. So men's bathroom, women's bathroom, side by side. And in many buildings, many people can appreciate, they take up the same floor space. It's like, okay, we need a bathroom. A bathroom is a bathroom, thinks the frequently male architect who is designing these spaces. Where you can fit 3 stalls in a women's bathroom, you can fit 2 stalls and 4 urinals in a men's. So women need the math, getting back to your comment about math, women need about 2 to 3 times the provision of men. And frequently what we get is half the provision of men. So that's why we're all waiting in line. Also the disco. I mean, obviously.
Right.
As per SNL.
Yes,
we
the
know.
hors d'oeuvres and the and
also, we're getting our hair done.
Spa.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. We're only talking kind of about a binary gender impacts in bathrooms. More and more, we're seeing bathrooms developed that the gender is separated from, we're just having single stalls, which addresses some of that. But so I think there's, the whole gender issue around bathrooms is such an interesting and complex history and future, and where it goes from a design standpoint. One of the things I do want to talk about in terms of public bathrooms and access, and I feel like it's inevitable, here comes another pun, in this conversation about public bathrooms, not to sound like we're shitting on public bureaucrats and city leaders who are building this, and just acknowledging it's hard. Like figuring this out is hard for a city, right? I'm leading up to a question at the end, who's doing it right? But it's hard. And so when we think about public bathroom access, and trying to make a public bathroom accessible, talking about, mobility issues. You mentioned, bathrooms in the bottom of stairs underground that are not accessible, just the size of different bathrooms, women's bathroom versus men's bathrooms. And then also, it's not a secret in a lot of places, people are trying to not make the bathrooms accessible to certain populations out of fear, out of cost, out of et cetera. So talk about that a little bit in terms of like, how are bathrooms accessible or not in public? What makes that particularly a challenge of creating access?
Well, like everything else with bathrooms, it's so multi-layered. So there's on the surface, it's the notion of, pure accessibility. So a bathroom that's downstairs is not an accessible bathroom. I interviewed a woman in my book who was talking about the size of bathrooms and the size of wheelchairs. So people who use wheelchairs, sometimes the chairs don't fit in the bathroom stalls. And that's not like, they're trying to fit in a non-accessible stall. They're trying to go into accessible stalls, and those stalls are not big enough. So there is an evolving kind of need to meet accessibility needs. It can be simple things like change tables, which need to exist in both male gendered and female gendered bathrooms. But there's other things, if somebody uses a wheelchair, the soap dispenser needs to be lower. Like, that's a great example. The hand towels need to be lower. There's a lot of other quote unquote accessibility issues around people's feelings in bathrooms. And I count these as accessibility issues, right? This is around safety. If you don't feel like you're safe in a bathroom, that's not an accessible space for you. So in addition to all of the design elements, which, while perhaps challenging, in whatever jurisdiction you're in, there's a checklist, right? There's a design checklist or a code checklist that you can go by. But in terms of safety, there's an onus on whatever the organizing body of that bathroom is to make sure that the bathroom is safe. And sometimes it's not, I find this is, as with so many things in bathrooms, there's like multiple sides to it. And it's really interesting just to think about the different sides. So, somebody may feel unsafe, but actually be perfectly safe. And you can't dismiss that somebody feels unsafe in a bathroom, because what's going to happen is they're not going to use that bathroom. And in terms of like keeping people out of bathrooms, it used to be in the early 20th century, mid 20th century, the kind of idea was bathrooms are weird and gross, and I guess we have to put them in, but let's put them in the back of the park, right? Which just makes the bathrooms weirder and grosser.
Right, and less safe.
Right. And so I think there's this almost neurotic approach that we have to bathrooms. And this gets back to the conversation we had about, puns and only thinking bathrooms are funny or dirty. We aren't able to think about bathrooms the same way we might be able to think about other pieces of infrastructure in our society. I always think about it this way, like a good bathroom is a bathroom that's like front and center, and which is fundamentally in the public space, it's surveilled. And I don't mean literal surveillance. I just mean, I always tell my kids the safest place to be is where there's lots of people, because it makes you feel safe, and you are more safe because there are more eyes on you.
Let's talk about that for a minute, about that surveillance, because when you think about surveillance, and I absolutely agree, we go back to the eyes on the street, and the more people see what's going on, the safer a place feels. And when we're talking about bathrooms, there is a piece of how do you balance surveillance with dignity? I live here in San Francisco, and you talk about the pit stops here we have in the book, and I think there is something to be said about the impact of the monitor, the bathroom monitor.
Yeah.
It's a system that works in a lot of places, but how do you think about that idea of surveillance when it can feel like impeding on privacy and dignity of trying to go to the bathroom here, right?
It's again one of those things that's a little bit like two-sided. So for me personally, my experience is I don't find that to be particularly impeding upon my privacy. The person's not in the room with me. I'm going in, and I have experienced a pit stop in San Francisco, and it was, by all accounts, every time I encountered somebody standing outside the bathroom, it was a pleasant experience. I had a little chat with them. I got done what I needed to do, and then I left. I think that surveillance idea, it sounds a bit nefarious when really what it is often about, I think, for most places, San Francisco aside and the pit stop program aside, it's often about co-location. Right now, I am in a rural town in Nova Scotia, Canada, and I'm just about 10 minutes outside the very small downtown core of this rural place. It's called Lunenburg. Lunenburg has, I think the population's 5,000. There are 2 public bathrooms. Now, it's a big tourist place. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. If any listeners know the Blue Nose, a famous schooner, it's where the Blue Nose lives. So there's a lot of tourists, but downtown, I'm using air quotes here for everybody, Lunenburg has 2 public bathrooms. They're right on the main drag on the waterfront. They're fantastic. One of them is in the summer co-located with a tourist bureau. So there's not always somebody there, but it's a place where, nobody is like counting how long you're in the bathroom, but there is somebody there who's just kind of got eyes on the building. And that to me is a pretty brilliant use of co-location that helps, again, not necessarily making somebody safer, but it makes somebody feel safer. I did some work in the last couple of years with downtown Portland, Maine, who are so interested in making the downtown core usable and livable and workable. I know they have been floating ideas about co-location. So taking, for example, this is a great idea that any downtown could use. Like if you have an empty storefront and it's got bathrooms, you can turn that into a space that can be many different things and also a bathroom. So I think there are ways of thinking about it that can alleviate people's concern and also just make it a safer space in reality too.
That makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that, design is absolutely important and a big part of it. And if it seems to me effective public bathrooms, it's the lion's share of it is about maintenance and management, which is connected to that co-location. But how do you manage the space? How do you maintain the space? Who does that? And how? I think seems to me that's, as bigger than how the bathroom is designed is how it's managed.
Yeah. And also how it's not only managed in terms of like supplied and cleaned, but, if you're running a business improvement district and you have a significant budget, you can make those bathrooms pretty darn nice, right? And I'm thinking about, some listeners will be familiar with the Bryant Park public bathroom. They're gendered bathrooms, they're stalls, but my gosh, like fresh flowers and, there's a lot going on in those bathrooms. They're just wonderful spaces. That's not the budgetary reality for most cities or most bids, but there are tiny steps you can take to make bathrooms places that are, I almost don't want to make this jump, but, your conversation with Jay Pitter about joy, and that was so interesting to me. And I just thought there's something there about like making spaces work and making spaces the kind of places that people want to be. And that can happen in a bathroom too.
Right. Well, it's interesting, and you probably have some examples of bathrooms that are tourist attractions. I know there's the whole London Loo tour, but interestingly, you said business districts with budgets can do this, and I would imagine there's also kind of the reverse of the business districts with budgets have good bathrooms, and which you might even be able to make the argument that you're not going to have a big budget as a business district if people aren't coming because the bathrooms suck, right? So it's a little bit of a jump to say, like that you have a big budget because you have a nice bathroom. But I think there's some small truth in that. Again, going back to the mandate, they don't have to maintain the bathrooms, certainly not to the level they do. But they understand the values. So how would you, if you're talking to a mayor who's saying, yeah, we've got a million things to fund and the bathrooms have always been fine. It's not a big deal, right? People are figuring it out. So no, I'm not going to put money into having a monitor or to redesign the bathrooms or doing any number of things that would make the experience of public space better. How do you make that argument to somebody who's in a policymaker position who's saying, no, it's not a budgetary priority?
I'm a big believer in equity. Like, I love equity. I love municipalities that prioritize equity. But you know what? In all my consulting work, everything I do like that, I'm always like, you know what? If somebody can't meet you at equity, which gets at the first point you made, which is like, actually, not everybody is figuring it out. When we think about public bathrooms, like, you think everybody's figuring it out, but everybody is not figuring it out. There are people that are not leaving their homes. There are seniors who are not taking medication when they know they have to go to your downtown core because they know they're going to be caught short. There are problems with open defecation in many, many major cities. Like, not everybody's figuring it out. So equity, great. But if you can't meet me at equity, I will meet you at finances. And all I will say is I would point anybody asking that question to any mall that exists. Every mall has a great food court and a great public bathroom. And they are clean and they are well supplied. And they don't do that out of the goodness of their hearts because these are commercial enterprises. They do it because they know if they have a good bathroom, people will stay longer and spend more. And it's the same with the food court. So I would say, you can't think about these as revenue neutral spaces or losses because they actually bring people and money to cities.
I mean, look at McDonald's as a model. Like, McDonald's is spending billions of dollars, presumably, on their bathrooms to keep their bathrooms open and maintained. And every traveler going through the world knows, oh, there's a bathroom. I see the golden arches. There's a bathroom. Oh, and while we're here, let's get some fries or whatever they sell there. Yeah. So there's definitely an economic case. It's interesting, like, talking about, again, in San Francisco, and I want to be careful because I do think this is the greatest city in the world. But the narrative of San Francisco over the last many years, which is changing rapidly, has been not great for a slew of political reasons and this and that. And one of the things that you have seen is the maps, right? And every city has them, but I think famously San Francisco had the open defecation map. San Francisco, on the scale of cities who provide public bathrooms, is not on the bottom by any means, right? There's a lot of public bathrooms here. They're well funded, they're well maintained, but people are much more inclined to put out the map of where the code browns on the street are versus the map of where the public bathrooms are. Bathrooms kind of always land at the center of a cultural battleground, whether we're talking about homeless people, trans people. Why is that? Why is that become such the flagship of this is what's wrong with the world? Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think public bathrooms have become a cultural touchstone in so many different ways for a few reasons. I guess the first reason is because public bathrooms are highly unique spaces. I would defy listeners to try to think about a space that is equal to a public bathroom in terms of being public and so intimately private, right? We engage in some of our most private activities in the bathroom, and yet these are public spaces that we share with strangers. So that itself makes them kind of this, like unique space in our worlds. I think another element of that is, we think about parks and plazas and, any other number of public spaces in our cities. There aren't very many infrastructural pieces of a city that are replicated in our homes. And so we have this like hyper comfort around bathrooms. Like people get really hung up on sharing, a single stall bathroom that is for everybody. But that is what all of us have in our homes, right? That is exactly the model of bathroom provision that we all have in our homes. So I think that's another element of it. It's public and private. It's also something replicated in our homes, so we feel like we understand bathrooms. And then when somebody says, actually, this bathroom doesn't work for me, and here are the reasons, I think each of us turns to our own experience and is like, well, believe me, I know from bathrooms, right? Because people use bathrooms in their homes. So I think that adds a layer of, weirdness to the way we converse about bathrooms. And then I think the other element is it seems to be that bathrooms are these places where so many different parts of our social culture are sort of highlighted or like amplified. So you think about, we were talking earlier about men's and women's bathrooms and the lineups and how that happens. And I think that typically most of us don't think about the spaces in our cities as gendered in this example, but actually bathrooms often are highly gendered. The infrastructure itself is coming from a position. There's positionality there. So I think that we have a hard time wrapping our heads around that, but you can talk about, so gender, gender is one thing. Access for trans individuals has, as you rightly point out, has been a big issue in the last few years. And I think that comes down to the core issue of gender in bathrooms. That's where things get really muddled. And also there's certainly a level of like cultural scaremongering that doesn't actually connect to reality about our safety, particularly women's safety in bathrooms. And in fact, we know that trans individuals are more likely to experience physical and verbal harassment and assault in bathrooms. And then it brings in, caregiving, and it brings in cruising. Bathrooms historically have been places where people have cruised for sex. I don't think that anybody wants to be in a public bathroom cruising for sex. This has to do with space and who gets to use space and who is allowed to do things in our cities. Like, I think that's why, just looping back to your question, there's this element of like everything is in bathrooms, when it comes down to it, everything is in there. And I think that's what makes them so interesting as a topic of study, and also so important that we have the conversations when we're talking about our cities.
Yeah, and I think I started out the conversation talking about how our public bathrooms really are a window into the greater city. The whole social dynamic, the dynamic of care, the dynamic of control, the dynamic of gender, it's all in our bathrooms. So as you started getting into this research and started digging deeper and deeper, what was surprising in this for you?
Well, I mean, I will say I was surprised about what we've been referring to as the math, because as somebody who is a cis woman, I'd always grown up waiting in bathroom lines. I just internalized it the way I think most women do, and thought, well, this is something we're doing something wrong here. So that was surprising to me to hear that math and to understand that. I think another surprising thing would be some of the poor design in bathrooms that goes unchecked. Like, in a lot of women's stalls, you sit down on the toilet, and then the toilet paper roll holder is like right against your leg. And it's like you can't get to the toilet paper. These things are just not being designed with anybody in mind. It's almost like bathrooms are neutral. We like to think of them as neutral, but they are not neutral. And if we design for this so-called neutral user, we're designing for nobody. So that was a bit surprising to me.
Yeah, why is the toilet paper thing and you pull on the toilet paper and it just rips it out. I hate, like, we could do a whole episode on toilet paper.
No, it's the
Why
worst.
don't we have bidets
We
here?
could.
How come bidets have not taken off outside of Japan? Or have they?
I mean, I've got a really nice one. But I may not be the average toilet person. I don't know. It's just, that's a cultural thing that I don't have an answer for.
It's bizarre, isn't
just
it? It's
don't
such
know.
smart design that's just
Yeah.
never taken off. So I want to get to like we spent a lot of time talking about the problems with public bathrooms. Like, where have you seen it work? Where have you been to a public bathroom that that was like, this is amazing, this is joy? That's almost a tourist attraction itself.
Whenever anybody asks me that, it's a common question, right? Because people, as much as people are like, oh, bathrooms are gross or bathrooms are jokes, they're also like, you wrote a book about what? And then everybody is always deeply, deeply interested because, yeah, bathrooms are so interesting. So I do get asked this a lot. I'm going to mention Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, which is where I am right now, which says, these are plain Jane, very basic public bathrooms, but big props to Lunenburg, Nova Scotia for putting in 2 public bathrooms in a very small place and understanding that need. And, that itself to me is very joyful. It's like, yeah, you don't have to wonder where the bathrooms are. You don't have to think about whether you're going into, McDonald's or Starbucks or Subway. Bryant Park in New York, I think it's a 1911 building, single level, male, female, amazing flowers, music. There's an attendant in each washroom. I did a radio documentary once where I interviewed one of the attendants in one of the bathrooms. And, they have specific hours that those bathrooms are open, but they will, for example, open the bathrooms a little bit early if there's an unhoused person who needs to get in. Like, these are great bathrooms. They are 100%, to your point, they are worth a visit. If you're in Manhattan, that's somewhere you should go because they are great bathrooms. And then I think Portland, Oregon has done a really great job. So Portland has a proprietary bathroom design called the Portland Loo. They partnered with a metal fabrication company, Madden Fabrication, and they have built these toilets, they fabricate them, and they sell them all over the place as long as, I think we have like one in Canada because it's too cold to have a Portland Loo here. But in any kind of warmish place, Portland Loos are great. They're off grid. These are like not the Bryant Park bathroom. There are no flowers and there's no music and there's no attendant, but they are so highly usable. They're big enough to fit a stroller or a bike. They're off grid. They have louvered bottoms. They have open bottoms. So, you can see if somebody's inside. There's potable water and hand washing stations on the outside, which is so great, right? So that's just a good example of, not only a city that thought it is our responsibility to provide for people, and also it benefits us to provide for people. But it's a really great use of, brain power. It's great.
What's one thing a city can do to make their bathrooms more effective, welcoming, equitable, accessible?
I really think it's about having somebody being responsible for the bathrooms. So in many municipalities, bathrooms get kind of tossed into some department, right? They're just a sort of afterthought. There's no bathroom department. It's like part of parks or part of, public works or whatever. There are lots of different things that prevent bathrooms from working well in the design, which are not easy fixes, but an easy fix is remembering that it takes one user to really mess up a bathroom. And as soon as that person messes up the bathroom is out of commission until it is visited again by a person who can fix it, which is to say, unclog the toilet or unclog the sink or clean up the bathroom floor or whatever it may be. So I think it's Again, I don't like the surveillance idea, and that's not what I mean necessarily, but that's another example of it. It's just like having eyes on the bathroom, having the bathroom be something that people see and see too.
So if you have a cleaning crew come in once or even twice a day to clean up, that may not have any impact if 5 minutes after the cleaning crew leaves, that's when that one person who destroys the bathroom is. Whereas if somehow you have surveillance on the bathroom all day, you can keep it accessible all day. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and there's I don't want to be too New York heavy here, but there's Greeley Square and Herald Square in Manhattan are like bow tie shaped park, kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it. And there's a cleaner. When I was doing the research for my book, this is in one of the chapters of my book, the cleaner just spends the whole day going from one end to the other. So there's this constant like cleaning, back and forth. They're highly used bathrooms, very visible. Those bathrooms are in incredible shape. The bid pays for this person to do it, and they're in great shape. And they also are, I don't want to overstate it, but these bathrooms are like, in these parks, the bathrooms are the gathering space. Like there are tables and there's a newsstand, but like people are going there for the bathrooms. And maybe if somebody's using the washroom, somebody else, as you say, grabs a coffee and has a seat.
Tell me briefly, you're working on drinking water now. Is that?
Yeah. Shaming municipalities one book at a time.
Exactly.
I'm so much fun at a party. So I'm working on a book about public drinking fountains and just looking at water access, and it's quite obviously related to public bathrooms, but it's another example of infrastructure that we used to care about and now we don't.
And interestingly, similarly to bathrooms, you don't have to. There's no requirement that a city provides that.
That's right. And also, just like bathrooms, there's this like, you can get a Dasani or whatever at the corner store, so don't worry about it. But that's not a good way to run a city. That's not a good way to create a space that is welcoming and also to meet people's needs.
All right. Well, we look forward to that book. Thank you so much for talking bathrooms with us. It's such a deep and fascinating. Everything I say is going to be a pun, whether I want it to be or not. But it's such an interesting and multi-layered conversation that really is at kind of the center of conversations about cities. So I really appreciate the work you've done on it and continue to do. And thanks so much for joining us. This was really fun.
Yeah, so happy to be here.
After the break, I talk with Carrie Tyson from downtown Portland, Maine, who's been working on something you don't hear about very often, a bathroom master plan. Not a single facility, not a pilot, but a deliberate citywide approach to figuring out where bathrooms belong, who they're for, and how to make them work over time.
My name's Carrie Tyson. I'm the executive director of Portland Downtown. We're the Downtown Improvement District in Portland, Maine. The original Portland.
The original Portland. That's right. And so they were getting a little too aggressive over in Oregon with their Portland Loos. So you're like, no, we're the bathroom Portland here.
That's right. They started it, but we're coming. We're taking it back.
Good. So you recently put out a public bathroom master plan.
That's right. A little bit of background here. So, I've been doing this kind of work for nearly 20 years now, but I got this job 5.5 years ago, right in the middle of the pandemic. One of the things that, this is not news to anyone listening to this podcast, that, the lack of public restrooms became extraordinarily evident during the pandemic because so many places were closed or social distancing or the like. And as an organization, we felt like that's something, it became ever so obvious to us that somebody needed to address this. And it became our effort to address it. We were addressing it one way or another because, those issues don't stop, obviously. It's just a matter of how you manage them. So we were managing them one way. We thought it would be better use of our resources to manage them through actually having public restrooms. So we really advocated strongly for ARPA money at the time to be used for public restrooms. We were successful in getting that allotment of about $750,000 here in the city of Portland for that effort. Our original hope was that that money would go to us and we would, be the ones sort of taking that on. But the city, understandably, wanted to address it citywide. Obviously, we have a very narrow geography that we manage, so that was sort of our gateway into this. One of my former board members was in publishing, and he was familiar with Lezlie Lowe's book, which I was too. And he said, you should just give her a call. We could hire her as a consultant. And honestly, it didn't cross my mind until he said it. It was just like she was this mythical person who had written a book that I didn't know why she would necessarily want to engage with someone like us. But that's what I did. And she, because of her passion in this, she helped lead us through that process. I think we're one of the handful of organizations and geographies out there with a restroom master plan. They're pretty uncommon.
I imagine they will become more common. One of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you is to really understand what we can learn from your process and your plan. I do want to acknowledge first, obviously, by the name of our podcast, clearly we're Jane Jacobs fans, and you reference Jane Jacobs in the master plan. You also reference Harry Potter in the plan. So it does seem like you had some fun putting this together, which, like, how could you not? But so tell me a little bit about the process of it. And particularly, I know I want to get to the pea shed tours.
Yeah. Process was long and windy, but ultimately a lot of fun. So one of our earliest undertakings was with a class at the University of Southern Maine, an urban planning class who came and consulted with us and did some analysis. There are a number of communities across the state of Maine and New England who have different styles of public restrooms. Everything from like former FEMA trailers that have been repurposed, and that's a common in Old Orchard Beach, which is a highly tourist town, maybe 45 minutes or so south of us, to more permanent structures in other parts of the coast and more tourist towns. But that was sort of our first draft analysis that we had some students done for us. And then we also did the math here on the local side of things as to where the public restrooms were. There's a lot of different ways to look at that. Obviously, there was a de facto Starbucks that was sort of a public. Was a public restroom, but that Starbucks, as a lot of them did during that last couple of years, it closed, and so that went away. And it showed sort of how the public side wasn't doing what the private side was, and how I think the public side was missing the gap on that. And so that's where we decided we needed to step up. One of the things we did was we mapped our district, and then we figured out everywhere you could go with a 5-minute walk. And then we put dots on that Google map. And that's where we determined that we needed ultimately public restrooms everywhere within a 5-minute walk of downtown. Now, that's just a model and a number. We really think 2 to 3 minutes is a better number, but we had to start somewhere. And of course, again, that's just our narrow geography, but it's a model that can be echoed in any community. So that was sort of where we began this process. And then the next thing we did, I think to your earlier question, is we started to do this through what we call the pea shed walk. So we started at a public park. We brought a ton of water for everybody. We tried to get as diverse a group as possible, gave everybody like drinks this water, and let's walk around and see when the urge happens and what we do about it. So we had a diverse group. We had like a pregnant woman was with us, a woman who had recently given birth, a person with IBS that was very open about sharing that and their need. And we literally just walked around and tried to see where we could use the facilities, and then what sort of privilege was able to be shall I say, taken advantage of, whereas it might not be the case for everyone. One of our folks went to the local fire station here, which is not a place that generally offers, come on in, general public. But she told that story of her IBS and her need, and they were like, yes, please just take, go right in there. And that's one of the things that we're highly aware of is that, if you walk with confidence and you're wearing clean clothes and the like, you can probably walk into any downtown hotel, which we have a ton of down here, and have no problem at all. But not everyone has that good fortune, and everyone pees. One of the ways we also talk about this is, Maine is either, depending upon the metric, the first or second biggest craft brew place in the United States by per capita. Well, ultimately, you only rent that. And so, if you're trying to get tourists here to come to do craft beer tours, and we have them, you need to provide the infrastructure to accommodate that. If that's something we're saying, hey, come here for, we need to provide a service that is accompanying with that.
Yeah, some of the best bathrooms in the world are in Austria.
Right.
Like, they drink a lot of beer.
That's right.
So when you went through this process, I'm sure you started from, we need more public bathrooms. It's clear that we have an insufficiency here, that we, being the bid, no one else has taken this on, we're going to take it on. What did you learn beyond the starting point of we need more public bathrooms? How did the process refine your understanding of what that means?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. One of the early undertakings we did in early COVID, to give you an example, was we rented a couple of porta potties. And everybody at the time, I'm sure this is true in every city across the world, was saying, oh, we need more restrooms because businesses were closed, et cetera. Well, that public restroom would set in location X for maybe 24 hours before my phone started ringing off the hook. Hey, that's great, but we don't want it here. It should be somewhere else. Everybody wanted a public restroom, but nobody really wanted it near them. So that was a frustrating undertaking, and we ultimately ended up with it in this very geographically neutral area that we happen to have. But not shocking anyone, the result of that, it didn't really get used much because it wasn't in a good location. Now, these were getting cleaned pretty much every day, every couple of days. That wasn't really the issue. It was, both perception and concern out of what might happen. Not what actually happened, but what might happen. So, we talk a lot about NIMBYs and the like in housing and other things, and that was kind of the case. Now, admittedly, porta potties are not exactly the most attractive thing in the world. So, I sort of get that. These weren't high-end wedding ones, but that was the step one, is that, everybody knows that you need one, but they don't necessarily want them nearby. So, what that ultimately led to, we talked a lot about a variety of approaches to this, and we experimented. We hosted a container potty for about 6 months here. We rented and had clean with frequency, and actually that worked really well. And we were did a couple of, dare I say, smart things. We had an artist design a wrap for it, so it was extremely attractive. Those particular units, the doors don't stay closed more than about 15 minutes. And that helped people feel more comfortable that, nobody was sort of hiding in there, whatever the case may be. And then, we had them cleaned with a high level of regularity and had a QR code on there where folks could report if there were any particular challenges. So that was our experiment that ultimately led out of that public restroom master plan to where here at Portland downtown, in our fairly new office that I'm setting in today, we just received our permit for building a public restroom in our facility ourselves. So we're going to walk the walk because we've been talking the talk. So it'll be cohabitating with us in our office. It'll also have like water fill stations, a place for you to charge your phone, a little bit of tourist information, that sort of thing. It's only going to get us so far. That's the first of many. We probably need 6 to 8 in our downtown, and we're fairly small compared to some places. Portland, Maine is 68,000 people, so we're not that huge. And our geography is obviously limited, but that is hopefully going to come online in the next few months.
Yeah, we talked to Leslie about co-locating, and I think that makes a lot of sense. You talk in the master plan about eyes on the street and kind of that visibility. And there's that paradox when you're talking about the portalets, which, yes, as you mentioned, are not the most attractive things in the world, but nobody wants to see them. And the flip side of that, if you can't see them, they become much more susceptible to, one, being unmaintained for longer periods of time because no one's saying, oh, there's a problem. And two, the behaviors that everyone's worried about in public bathrooms are much more susceptible if they're in places that are hidden. So are you doing staffing? And are there other ways that you're creating those eyes on the streets for the new bathrooms as you implement the plan?
We are, yes. We're gonna have like an usher and a attendant who's gonna be there most of the time. Though there will probably be times our goal is to have it basically 7 to 7. Ideally, I think 24 hours is what you need, but this is the ability, the bandwidth we have. And we'll probably have someone in there till 5 or 6 o'clock. So there'll probably be an hour or two on both ends of the day where it won't quite be as well overseen. That's how we're starting. We're also well aware that, wherever we start, I'm sure we're going to learn a ton and shift and adjust. We're a second chance employer through our ambassador program that we've just launched about 6 months ago here. And we want to continue that kind of public service, with the person that we hire to be there. They'll also do things like give directions and, we'll have some, like I said, tourist information, that sort of thing. So, and they'll probably be doing some administrative stuff for the organization as well. So we will have those eyes on the street. But, the other part of that is design. Trying to be as very conscientious as we can about design because we believe light and beauty are what really is the game changers here. This is a very well lit. It has a lot of windows in this particular space. So there'll be when the time, parts of the year, there'll be a lot of natural lights. And also just the physical bathroom design itself is important. While the doors won't be translucent, because there will be privacy and all that, it will have a little bit of a translucent feel. You won't be able to see through it, but it has that kind of design aesthetic. We also have a gap under the door so that we can just sort of, make sure nobody has run into a bad situation, and the door will come off on the outside if, God forbid, there's a need for that. So all these design aesthetic pieces are part of it as well. Additionally, the wash area will be outside of the stall proper.
Are these all non-gender or non-gender specific stalls?
Non-gender, yeah.
Just individual stalls.
Yeah, just gender neutral.
When you were talking about like the monitor doing admin tasks, I was going to ask, is that your way of telling the bookkeeper that you're moving their desk?
No, it's not. It's that we need more. We got a lot going on.
You're going to be over here now.
Yeah, your job has changed.
Yeah, between journal entries, can you just make sure the toilet paper's full?
It's my tool to make sure nobody makes me mad.
If I was running a bid or a district or a park or a city and I was about to embark on a public restrooms master plan, any advice you'd give me?
Well, hire a good person like Leslie. That's the first thing. And the biggest other thing is just to physically walk it. I actually had a former colleague ask me this. She's like, I don't know where to start. And my advice is to start by mapping what you have. And then you may know it in your head, but putting it on paper is enlightening, particularly when you start to look at the hours. Places like your library in almost every town is probably basically serving as that. They often close at 5 or 6 o'clock. So that only does you so much good. So when you put this down on paper, that's one. And then you start walking that piece where your 5 or 2 to 3 minute are. Put those dots there, and that can be your goal. Because the other part is we ultimately had to do this in our facility because we had a rough time trying to. We talked about buying some of the various other Thrones or Urban Blues or these various other options, but just the land availability here in our community just made it impractical because we have the good fortune to be, a pretty thriving area. We also didn't want to take up a whole lot for a public restroom, whereas we'd rather it be a thriving retail restaurant, whatever the case may be. So finding that perfect geography with lots of light and easily accessible is sort of the other aspect of that.
So walk it with a full bladder.
That's right. That's right. Take a bunch of people with you. Know your privilege. Yeah.
So one last question for you. I understand you have a new name you got from this project.
Well, yeah, they call me Toilet Tyson around here. It's kind of, everybody knows I'm the guy beating the drum about the public restroom, which is better than crappy Carrie. So,
That's true. That could be worse. I could think of other things they could call you. Well, thank you so much, Toilet Tyson, for talking to us about public bathrooms. I'm trying to think of 3 things that are more important in a downtown than accessible bathrooms, and I'm coming up empty. So appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the Sidewalk Ballet with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love the pod.
No district ever markets itself as a great place to live, work, play, and pee. That's just not how cities talk about themselves. But for some, having an understanding of whether or not you're going to have a problem, whether you're going to have to cut your visit short, make a purchase you didn't plan on, or start scanning the block, that can be a deciding factor in how long you stay. Bathrooms don't make a place exciting, but their absence can quietly make it unwelcoming. Public bathrooms sit in this strange space between invisibility and necessity. We're fascinated by them when they're beautiful or unusual. We joke about them when they're awkward, and we often avoid talking about them or funding them when they're just needed. Bathrooms rarely show up in the story a city tells about itself, but they shape how that story is actually lived. Sidewalk Ballet is presented by Big Creative Consulting, strengthening community through culture and place. Learn more at bigcreativeconsulting.com. Support also by This Must Be the Place, a bi-monthly newsletter connecting placemaking professionals to opportunities. Learn more at thismustbe.org. Contributors include Abra Allen and myself. Engineering and editing by Ryan Musante. Our theme music was composed by the Peacoat Project. If this conversation resonated, please share it with someone who's doing the work of keeping their community whole. And join the conversation on our Discord server, also linked at sidewalkballet.com. I'm Chip. Thanks for joining us on this block of the Sidewalk Ballet. I'll see you downtown. So what about this? Can I say the reason we're doing this episode is because it's February, and February is the we month?
No.
What about this? Can I say it's the number 2 month?
Please don't.
But why do I even have a podcast?